Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, page 188. Each of these refinements offers much more specific and detailed ways to characterize a state, laying the foundation of a variety of very specific methods that can be carefully tailored to alter someone's experience. This kind of refinement is what happens in the development of any field as it progresses. Finer and finer distinctions are made, and understandings become more and more detailed and specific. However, some developments in the field have gone in the opposite direction. When someone applies a vague and general state to another state, to create a meta-state that compounds the ambiguity and uncertainty about what is actually happening. If this meta-state is further meta-stated, the confusion deepens exponentially. Intensity of feeling states. Since evaluative feelings are signals, they are very useful as a measure of change in response to an intervention to resolve a problem. Evaluative feeling signals can change in quality, such as from fear to security, which indicates a significant digital category change. Feelings can also change in intensity, even when the quality of feelings remains the same. For instance, for intense fear to mild concern. It can be useful to ask someone to assign a number to their experience on a scale of 1 to 10 to specify the intensity of a feeling. This quantification can then be used to track how someone's feelings about a problem, situation vary naturally, or how they change in response to an intervention to resolve a problem. In some research, this kind of measure has been called SUD, an acronym for Sensory Unit of Distress. Specifying the intensity of a feeling numerically is particularly useful in pain control, because many people experience pain digitally, pain or no pain, when the intensity of pain actually varies considerably over an analog range. When they are asked to pay attention to changes in intensity, they can use these changes to identify elements in attention, thinking, activity, or context that reduce or increase their pain. Once these elements are identified, they can be used voluntarily to reduce pain, sometimes even to zero. For instance, when someone discovers that attending to the sensory feelings in the feet and hands reduce the pain felt in their back, or that watching a movie or relaxing reduces it, that is something that they can learn to do voluntarily and eventually habitually to reduce their pain. Tracking the intensity of the pain provides useful feedback information about what works best to alter it. The arithmetic theory of states fallacy. There is another way of using the intensity of a state that is much less useful. It is fine to assign an intensity of 6 to a problem state and use changes in that as an indication of what works best to reduce the intensity of their response to a problem. However, some people go on to assume that in order to resolve an unpleasant state, they need to access a pleasant state that is at least as intense. If the resource state isn't more intense than the problem state may contaminate or overwhelm the resource state. In order to resolve a 6 problem state, you need at least a 6 plus or 7 plus resource state. That kind of statement reveals a complete misunderstanding of how evaluative feelings work. They cannot just be added or subtracted from each other. It is not the intensity of a resource state that matters. What is important is the quality of appropriateness of the resource state to the problem. For instance, the classic NLP fast phobia cure certainly provides a vivid counterexample to the idea that a resource state must be as intensely positive as the problem is negative. A phobia is one of the most intense psychological states that someone can experience. Surely a 10. However, the resource, visual dissociation, is a neutral or very mild state, no more than a 1 plus 1. According to the arithmetic theory of states, the phobia cure could not possibly work. On the other hand, a very intense state of excitement can make a phobia worse. Our interventions need to be directed at the situation or our perception of the situation, not its evaluation. Someone with a phobia is missing a particular skill, dissociation, so they feel very bad when they recall an unpleasant past experience, as if it were happening again. After they learn how to dissociate from the unpleasant memory and view it as if it were happening to someone else, their evaluation of it is very different, resulting in feelings that are very matter of fact, and they can leave the unpleasantness of that memory in the past where it belongs. Whenever someone is stuck in an unresourceful state, it is because they are missing some skill or ability that would enable them to deal with a problem situation. Or to put it another way, they are not able to access the appropriate neurology for the task at hand. They might never have learned an appropriate response, or they might have learned it but never applied it in the problem situation. A very simple difficulty may result in a very intense evaluative emotional response, and often a very simple and unremarkable resource will resolve it. How to select such an appropriate resource state is described in more detail elsewhere. Reference 9. Evaluative feelings tell us what is important to someone and what they are motivated to change, and we can use the change in evaluation as a very important feedback signal that tells us when our intervention has been partially or wholly successful. But the intensity of response is irrelevant to choosing what kind of resource will be useful in resolving a problem. Attending to the intensity of the evaluative response is a common example of attempting to make change at the wrong logical level. Another example of this confusion of logical levels is the difference between self-concept and self-esteem. Many people use these two terms interchangeably, but they are quite different. Your self-concept is the aggregate of the ideas that you have about yourself, how you categorize yourself, Self-esteem is the positive or negative feeling of evaluation of the self-concept. Self-esteem is the positive or negative feeling of evaluation of the self-concept, which is at a higher logical level. If you value your self-concept, you automatically have high self-esteem, and if you don't value it, you have low self-esteem. When someone has low self-esteem, it is futile to try to have positive feelings of self-esteem directly. Someone's evaluative feelings of self-esteem will increase automatically if one of two things happens. First, if their values change so that they can appreciate who they are. Or second, they learn new behaviors and responses so that who they are becomes aligned with their values. Approaches that have been effective in raising self-esteem actually change either self-concept or values so that they match. The arithmetic theory of states also leads to another very misleading assumption. The idea that a resource is always a resource, regardless of the task, problem, or context. For instance, being alert and attentive is very useful when learning new skills or in a situation of danger, but not when your goal is to sleep and get some rest. What is important is that a resource is appropriate to what is missing in the problem situation. An essential skill in one situation will be a serious liability in some other context. For instance, dissociation is a powerful resource for a phobia, which typically results from association into a very unpleasant memory. But if someone is grieving over a death, dissociation from pleasant memories of the dead person is the fundamental core of the problem. And the necessary resource is the exact opposite of dissociation. Association into positive memories of being with the dead person. Someone who has difficulty maintaining sexual excitement is often evaluating their performance as if he or she were a judge at a divining competition. Divining competition. From that dissociate perspective, they lose access to their physical feelings of arousal. As with grief, dissociation is the problem, and association is the solution. Both dissociation and association can be either wonderful resources or terrible liabilities, depending on the context, and that is true of all our skills and abilities. Examining and adjusting values. Values are subcategories of a more general category that might be called things that are important. Different people value freedom, pleasure, money, honesty, fame, novelty, stability, health, etc. Generally, you value experiences that feel good or that benefit you in some way, and negatively value the ones that feel bad or have unpleasant consequences. Like all other categories, values have criteria that specify what sensory-based scopes are included in the category. For instance, the criteria of novelty are different from freedom or knowledge. As with other categories, we typically use some kind of prototype experience to represent the entire valued category. Since many things and events are important to you, and in very different ways, you have many different values. A great variety of different events can satisfy the same value. For instance, if you value status, you can get that by an expensive car, a big ring, or an important title, or knowing a lot about some subject, etc. Same thing or event can also satisfy several very different values, because it is important to you in several different ways. Having a big house can be comfortable shelter, enhance status, allow you to host parties of friends, be a secure investment, etc. If you value a close relationship, sex, children, and stable home, it usually works best if you satisfy all those values with the same person. While some values are well integrated and organized by their relative importance, others may be more separate and independent, and this can result in a variety of different values conflicts. Examining our values and revising them or changing their relative importance can eliminate a lot of repeated frustration and doubt that results from not being clear about our values. Changes in values are always in relation to other values that are more or less important. The resulting changes will affect decisions and responses across the entire range of contexts that a value is active in. An effective way to work at a higher logical level than a specific context of confusion. The first step is to discover what your values are. Values. What are the things, activities, and events that are valuable to you? What would you miss a lot if you no longer had access to them? Think about the many aspects of your life, the different people, locations, activities, information, and things that are important to you. Values. What are the things, activities, and events that are valuable to you? What would you miss a lot if you no longer had access to them? Think about the many aspects of your life, the different people, locations, activities, information, and things that are important to you. Now, review specific examples of each of those and notice what is important to you about each of them. For instance, you might value a special friend for their physical affection, their outrageous sense of humor, their ability to listen to you when you are down, or offer a new slant on events, etc. As you review different events, notice which values come up repeatedly in different contexts, because those will probably be ones that are generally more important to you across a wide variety of contexts. Reviewing values. It can be very useful to review your past behavior in different contexts to find out which values actually governed your decisions, what the later consequences were, and how satisfied you are with the results. Getting clear on what you actually value can sometimes be sobering, because sometimes there is a significant difference between the values that you consciously think are important and how you actually behave and respond. Someone may say that they believe in honesty, and then find themselves lying or remaining silent in situations where they say that honesty is important to them. Reviewing events can be particularly useful in situations in which you experience some conflict of values. For instance, I vividly recall when I was in college nearly 50 years ago and had invited a young woman to a party. Then I had the opportunity to invite another young woman whom I liked better. I wrestled with what to tell the first one, not wanting to hurt her feelings, and not... For instance, I vividly recall when I was in college nearly 50 years ago and had invited a young woman to a party. Then I had the opportunity to invite another young woman whom I liked better. I wrestled with what to tell the first one, not wanting to hurt her feelings and not wanting to change my agreement with her. I finally decided to be honest and told her the situation and that I would prefer to go with someone else. When I went to the party, the first young woman was there too, and I thought about how much unpleasantness I had avoided by being honest. It can also be very useful to review the last time you did something that you were not satisfied with, or that someone else complained about. What values were expressed in that event, and what others did you ignore, set aside, or not consider until later? For example, was that phone call that your wife forgot to tell you about that made you angry really more important than your loving relationship with her? If that situation were to happen again, do you want to get angry again, or would you rather do something different that would be a better expression of what is important to you when you consider the larger scope of your relationship over time? Using a different scope in this way, or changing how you categorize a scope, can change how your values are active in responding to a situation. Conflicting values. Even in a fairly simple situation, like choosing a meal at a restaurant, different values come into play, and you need to sort out which values are most important to you. You may be hungry, so you'd enjoy a big meal, but you plan to exercise afterward, so a smaller meal will be better for that. That dessert may look very tempting, but you also want to lose weight. Perhaps it's an expensive restaurant, so you decide to buy a smaller meal in order to save money for something else, even though you are quite hungry. These are examples of the kind of choice that we face repeatedly every day. Between something we value at the present moment and something that we value at a future time or place. An example of the usefulness of a longer scope of time. When making a decision, you never to sort out which qualities are more important to you and ignore other less important ones. For instance, in buying a car, you may value safety, fuel, efficiency, style, color, space, comfort, newness, acceleration, and low cost. But fuel efficiency is likely to reduce the acceleration. Comfort may affect safety. A particular style may reduce the space, and all of these may increase the cost of the car. If you don't know which of these are more important to you, it will be very difficult to make a good decision. Prioritizing in a hierarchy. Many important life decisions are far more complex than selecting a meal or buying a car. In order to make these difficult decisions about what is more important, it is useful to prioritize your values in some kind of hierarchy. When someone doesn't prioritize their values, they may not even consider other values when making a decision. They may see the tasty dessert or the pretty red car and buy it without even thinking about how they will pay for it, or what else they could use that money for at some other time or place. They may not even consider all the other possible choices that might satisfy other values, which might be much more important to them. As people say, in the larger scope of things,